Thursday, 4:02 p.m. Late for class, I hurriedly answer my cell phone to my mom asking if I had spoken with my little brother yet that day. I pause. The outer door is slightly ajar, my hand tight on the handle. No, why? I respond. Her voice is strange, off. The door slips from my fingers, shutting with finality as she begins to cry over the phone. It is a broken sound of fear and pain as she explains that earlier that day, a high school student had committed suicide, my brother's best friend. A million scenes and emotions flash through my head. The boys playing spikeball in the basement, the boys eating ice cream at the Dairy Queen after a middle school choir concert, or laughing as I drove them home from their job at the local car wash. The annoyance I felt whenever they were too rambunctious, the guilt too, at having been annoyed. The disbelief that washed over me, the reality. I saw it in my head and felt it in my heart, and yet the doubt crept in. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. I braced myself for it again and again, and yet each time I was unprepared for the words she had spoken, the painful truth raking my soul. Aaron was gone. I grew up in Salem, Oregon. My community, my high school, was accustomed with grief. During my high school years, the student body suffered together with the loss of students to accidents and suicide alike. You cannot predict how tragedy will strike. Sometimes you cannot even predict how to respond. We had never been trained what to say because society had trained us not to say anything. We would make it worse if we brought it up, we thought. We would hurt someone's feelings or trigger someone's emotions, we assumed. In Marion County, where I went to school, a statewide survey noted how 20% of 11th graders and 14% of 8th graders said they had seriously considered attempting suicide in 2017. Just last year, 12,278 young people reached out to Oregon Youth Crisis Line. According to the spokeswoman for Oregon's Suicide and Crisis Line, Lines of Life, it was common for people who do attempt suicide to talk about ending their pain rather than their lives. They are hurting and horribly confused about their purpose in life. For example, in the wake of the Netflix series release 13 Reasons Why, there was an increase in internet searches concerning suicide. Though dismaying, studies found that the majority of inquiries were for suicide hotlines and suicide prevention. According to this study, people are seeking help, whether for themselves with hotlines like Lines of Life in my state, or for their loved ones through suicide prevention. Now take these numbers from my county, from my state, and imagine them multiplied by 50. Imagine them in your hometown, and imagine how it would respond. Think, how can we help? First, we need to know the myths. There are many myths associated with suicide that lead to confusion, bias, stereotypes, stigmas, and more. However, there are 2 myths specifically that have influenced my understanding of suicide for much of my life. Primarily, when discussing suicide, our society has a distinct fear that by talking about suicide, people are more likely to commit suicide. Often this discussion is met with hushed tones. Reactions to the topic led me to believe that suicide was a behind closed doors conversation. It was as though I couldn't bring it up, for fear of planting the idea in someone else's mind or in my own. This fear carries over into the sectarian notion that suicide is an unforgivable, damning sin. This myth has been brought about by parallels often drawn between the act of committing or attempting suicide with the act of committing or attempting self-murder. Our understanding has been that suicide is a rejection of God's path and eternal blessings. It is a fear that has plagued me personally. This misunderstanding has always been inconsistent with my image of a loving and forgiving God. When we are faced with mortal and eternal questions, we must recognize that we do not know all the answers. There is no perfect solution, but there are ways to move forward. So let me offer my solutions for societal and spiritual healing in regards to suicide. By talking about suicide, we do not run the risk of increasing someone's chances of committing suicide. Instead, we allow for healing to begin. It is a hard topic to address. However, teaching difficult subjects, like inoculation against harmful and deadly diseases, provides accurate information on misunderstood topics. Suicide is one of those topics that is misunderstood. It is time to open a dialogue that will allow for individuals who are suffering to have a safe haven from the storm. In fact, psychologists and ecclesiastical leaders alike agree that the most effective healing for those struggling with suicidal tendencies is fostered by a non-judgmental, accepting, and supportive environment. Finally, I extend my response to loved ones suffering from guilt. I often wonder if there was something I could have done differently. I have learned that this line of thinking only leads to despair. Instead, I call out to you with concern. It is not about what we could have done, but what we are going to do together. In high school, I did not know how to respond. In college, I am still weary. Nonetheless, I am confident that little by little, I will be able to help in the healing process for myself and for others. I cannot help but feel the grief and pain that I'm sure is only amplified in those who have been closest to Aaron during his life. There is still confusion and fear, but there is also hope. Hope for the mercy of a God who is also a Father. Hope in the atonement and the sacrifice that makes up the requirements of justice. Hope that we will reject stereotypes and offer hands. Hope that communities will come together in open dialogue in support of those who have suicidal tendencies, who have attempted suicide, who feel marginalized, who have lost family members. Seek to help. Seek hope.